about the urban intelligence for healthy urban development. And I would like to address a few opening remarks to the panel before we start talking. But Professor Chin, do you want to address a few words to the panelists?
Yes.
Or will you come after me?
Anyway, you're the host. I follow you.
Okay, so please, you have the word. The floor is yours.
Thank you, friends. Dear distinguished guests, good afternoon and good morning to our international participants. On behalf of New Technology Center of China Association for Science and Technology, I would like to welcome and extend my gratitude to all participants to attend this webinar of Urban Intelligence for Healthy Urban Development. This is also an online session of 2020 Green Development and Innovation Conference. 2020 is a year of uncommon. The pandemic of COVID-19 has struck the world with devastating power. In this fight, we have witnessed the efforts of governments, courage of general public, and especially the dedication of medical workers and the great contribution of the scientists. COVID-19 reminds us that we are living in an interconnected global village with a common stake and a shared future. COVID-19 also reminds us that we should move fast to create a green way of development, preserve the environment, and make our Earth a better place to live. Green development has a deep root in Chinese leaders' philosophy of development. 15 years ago, our President Xi Jinping put forward his famous development theory of lucid waters and large mountains are invaluable assets, which was later known as two-mountain theory. Nowadays, this philosophy for green development is changing the country with a grand goal of building a beautiful China. Green development also resonates with the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. China aligned SDGs with National Development Strategy to promote balanced economic, political, cultural, and ecological progress. Now China is 10 years ahead of the schedule of poverty eradication target set out in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Recently, it is sad to see that this pandemic of COVID-19 is resurging. In these times of great uncertainty, we can be certain about one thing, that science and scientific thinking and value and international collaboration among scientists we trust must be central components of the responses to global challenges. All scientists shall work together to facilitate the green recovery of world economy in the post-COVID era, and thus create a powerful force driving sustainable development. China Association for Science and Technology is the leading scientific organization in China, which is composed of more than 200 national academic societies and hundreds of local branches at various levels. It forms a distinguished network of millions of Chinese scientists and engineers as well. As the representative of Chinese science community and the national member of International Science Council, it is our obligation and responsibility to work with the international science community to strengthen the international scientific cooperation for the benefit of all. I'm glad to see that the topic of our webinar, Healthy Urban Development in Digital Age, just coincides with the 2 of 4 domains of priority set in International Science Council's action plan, that is 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Digital Revolution. We look forward to your insights and outlook on these topics. We do hope that this 2020 Green Development and Innovation Conference, especially the webinar of Urban Intelligence for Healthy Urban Development, could be a great platform for the scientists to think about how mission-oriented science can build pathway to solutions for complex and grand challenges facing humanities. Again, thank you all for your participation, and may this webinar a great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chin. I will now open the panel for discussion with a few initial remarks. Cities, as we know, are where the majority of people on Earth live, and they have had the largest impact on the health and well-being of people and the sustainability on Earth. With increasing populations and changing environments, the risk landscapes are also changing towards more interconnected systems and systemic risk. In such a world, the mode and the speed of decision-making changes. COVID-19 has shown us the need of early and fast action, and how the entire world has become a so-called extended peer community, where all who have a stake have a voice and contribute to knowledge production. The underlying hypothesis for this panel discussion is that we are creating risks and unwanted health outcomes for ourselves and for the environment because the data metabolisms of our societies are not in place or do not work. The result is that we don't have the data or not sufficient data and quality of data. People don't trust the data because they are not part of knowledge creation and consequently react inappropriate, simply too slow to prevent or mitigate health emergencies like COVID-19 or like climate change. The tendency seems to be that with increasing systemic risks, there is also a stronger need for systemic governance, which is more participatory, distributed, networked, or polycentric, and at the same time, science-based leadership and trust in political leadership has been essential. So feedback and learning mechanisms are either lacking or not working, and thereby impairing systems' intelligence. The systems which need to respond and trigger appropriate decision-making and action are either lethargic or in a state of inertia and not well integrated into political decision-making and society. Therefore, systems which produce data, generate knowledge, and trigger action, so-called data knowledge action systems, need to be put in place and made functional. The data metabolism needs to be revitalized so that cities become more intelligent in creating healthy and resilient environments. So in this panel, we will listen to some distinguished panelists, scholars in the field who will contribute to answering the questions, how can this be done? How can we revitalize or re-establish this data metabolism? What are the obstacles for it to function, and how can we overcome these obstacles? Our first speaker is Simon Hodson from the International Science Program, CODATA program in Paris. Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, friends. So I'm just going to say hello to everyone, and I'm going to switch off my video to save bandwidth, and I will share my screen so that you can see my presentation. You should be able to see the title slide there. Please confirm.
Yes, we can see, Simon.
Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, so thanks very much, Franz, for that introduction and for inviting me to speak on this panel. I'm Simon Hodson, Executive Director of CODATA. CODATA is the Committee on Data of the International Science Council. Very quickly, CODATA's mission is to connect data and people to advance science and improve our world. And that may sound very high level, idealistic, perhaps even motherhood and apple pie, if you're familiar with that expression. But I think it connects very closely with precisely the issues that Franz was highlighting there. That understanding the challenges that we face, developing solutions, and implementing those requires that connection between people, data, knowledge, and action. And that will be an ongoing theme, I think, of this webinar. As the Committee on Data at the International Science Council, CoData supports the ISC's mission of advancing science as a global public good. And we do so by promoting open science and fair data. I'm not going to go into the definitions of those things, but please look at what CoData and other organizations have done about open science and fair data, because that feeds into this discussion. CoData has, in our strategy, we have 4 pillars of activity. We do a lot of work on data policies. We have an international data policy committee and produce regular data policy reports. We do a lot of work on technical and scientific issues around data science. We have a journal, the Data Science Journal, and regular conferences. We do a lot of work on data skills, education, and training for researchers to develop skills for looking after data, data management, data stewardship, and data analysis. And then finally, this 4th pillar of strategic activities comprises activities led by the CoData Secretariat and Executive Committee, which are determined by our membership as being the important issues that CoData should address. In recent years, we've looked at regional open science platforms, and we've been very involved in the International Science Council's work on an African open science platform. And now what I'm going to talk about is this global program, which we've been tasked to establish, a decadal program because it will last 10 years, entitled Making Data Work for Cross-Domain Grand Challenges. And that feeds very much into the themes of this webinar. So the International Science Council, in its new Science Action Plan, looked at some of the important pressing issues for science globally. And one of the themes of that action plan is our response to the challenges and the opportunities of the digital age, and the relationship of those challenges and opportunities to global grand challenges. And the premise of a significant part of that Science Action Plan and of the work that CoData has been asked to do is that the major pressing global scientific and human issues of the 21st century, so things that have already been mentioned, climate change, mitigation and adaptation, the growth of cities, the understanding cities as complex entities analogous to organisms, disaster risk reduction, and so on. These human and scientific grand challenges can only be addressed through research that works across disciplines to understand complex systems and which uses a transdisciplinary approach to turn data into knowledge and then into action. And we're faced, therefore, with a significant challenge in relation to that life cycle through the whole process, data to knowledge to action, but in particular from a CoData perspective and what we're primarily concerned with the data. How is the data gathered? How is it described? How is it looked after? And then, of course, how is it turned into knowledge and action? For a number of years, 2 decades at least, the International Science Council has developed global programs, coordinating activities on a global scale to try and bring the scientists together and to try and encourage cooperation and coordination in the scientific endeavor to address these major grand challenges. This includes programs like Future Earth, Integrated Research on Disaster Risk, the program that Franz leads, Urban Health and Wellbeing, and also related activities relating to the Sendai framework the Sustainable Development Goals, and the 2030 Agenda. Now, those programs do excellent work, but they all face, as I've already said, a major challenge, which is how to mobilize the data effectively to support the operation and the realization of those goals. And we hear that very often, particularly in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals, the indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals, and the scientific critique and the scientific contribution to understanding those goals and to our work towards achieving them. In all of these areas, there is need. Data plays a significant role, and we hope to develop a program, or we've been tasked to develop a program, which we hope will support such international cooperation and coordination by providing an important element in relation to data. So, roughly 2 years ago, when that action plan was being developed, CoData was asked to start developing our program design. We've divided our activities into these three areas that are on the screen there. And I'm going to start unconventionally with the second box there, number 2. So we feel it's important to liaise with, to work with existing domains. And they're represented in the International Science Council by the international scientific unions and associations. Each domain has its own data challenges, the way it defines the questions it addresses, the way it defines the things it observes and measures. And we can learn a lot from that, but also in some instances, there's need for mobilizing activity and for further development of metadata specifications, of terminologies and ontologies. And I'm not going to go too much into that technical area around data, but those things are important. We also want to explore some of the issues precisely in these cross-domain areas. And we currently have case studies in resilient cities and disaster risk reduction in infectious diseases. And overarching is the technical and scientific work to try and help each of those case studies identify the issues they are facing with data, and to develop community-led and consensus solutions in terms of the technical issues around data and how they're applied in research and knowledge creation and in policy. We've been working on this for a couple of years, and we've now got a suite of at least 7 very active areas of activity. We're doing work on digital representation of units and measures because that's fundamental to data interoperability. I've mentioned semantics, metadata specifications, terminologies, and ontologies, which are essential for how we understand data, how we look after data and manage data, and how we can combine different data sets. We're doing a lot of work with the Data Documentation Initiative on a new metadata specification called Cross-Domain Integration, which I'll go into on a future slide. And then we have these 3 case study areas: policy monitoring indicators, SDGs and Sendai, as I've mentioned, work on infectious diseases, and work on resilient and healthy cities. And then finally, an overarching area of activity, one of the first projects which will be part of the decadal program, is a CAS, Chinese Academy of Sciences funded project to encourage cooperation and coordination, and ultimately, we hope, technical alignment and interoperability between open science cloud or platform initiatives, those large investments for research infrastructures which are underway in a number of regions of the world. And it's important in the development of those infrastructures that we don't create a series of national or regional silos, but the data and the science can collaborate across those infrastructures. I mentioned our collaboration with the DDI, the Data Documentation Initiative. They've developed a draft metadata specification called Cdi, Cross-Domain Integration. And a lot of the stimulus for that development came precisely out of some of the workshops which Codedit has been running in the last 2 years in partnership with DDI. And the DDI specification is designed to work with other metadata specifications to assist the way in which data can be combined between data sets and across domains. And we're increasingly hearing this as a requirement and as a use case from research groups, from data archives, who are increasingly needing to address the cross-domain global grand challenges which I've mentioned. We have some funding as well from the European Open Science Cloud to do further consultation and development of that specification with a view to its adoption by communities working with the European Open Science Cloud. But it's an international specification. DDI is an international organization, and we hope that that specification will be of use and interest globally. There's a lot more work to do on it, but we are very keen to have further input from scientific communities. Now, I'm going to close this short presentation with two of the case studies that we've been working on. And in fact, Franz, I thought you were going to present the DACAS in your opening remarks. So perhaps I should not present, please give me some guidance, perhaps I should not present the slide after this and leave you to present the DACAS. So I'll just present this one case study and I'll leave Franz to present the data action knowledge. Is that correct?
Simon, feel free to present it. We don't have too much time. Again, I will not show it. So if you have it on your slides, please just show it and mention it shortly.
Okay. So I'm going to mention quickly these two case studies that we've been working with, which are examples of the sort of work we're doing in these cross-domain research areas. So we're part of a project with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, which is combining health and demographic surveillance systems data in Africa with clinical data. Now, that project originally started with HIV and the endemic crisis of HIV, particularly in the southern areas of Africa. So these large-scale data gathering exercises, the HDSS, collect data about individuals on a very large scale. It's anonymized. And then this project combines that data with clinical data relating to the same individuals where that's possible. Again, this is a secure system that can only be accessed by researchers, but that data combination in itself is a significant challenge. It relies on consistent semantics and metadata, and the new specification DDI CDI is also playing a role, as are other specifications to do with social science data and clinical data. But you can see instantly, I hope, how important that research is of itself, and how important the data combination, the work on the data is to facilitate that work on the endemic crisis of HIV in Southern Africa. And I hope you can also see how adaptable that work is to the current crisis and the current pandemic. So that team has learned a lot in terms of interoperability and combining data from different sources from that case study, and they'll be applying it to COVID data and to other transmissible and non-transmissible diseases. And then the final substantive slide is really a first insight into the data knowledge action system. And I thought I was going to be presenting this after Franz, but I'll just go through this very, very quickly. This has been developed by Franz as part of some of the collaborative work that we've been involved with as a theoretical framework for how we combine our various interests to meet the pressing needs of resilient and healthy cities and these complex city dynamics and the analogy of organisms. There at the top of the diagram, in those colored boxes, we have the issues and that cities face, and the data which is gathered around those particular issues and sources. When properly managed and stewarded, those data sources can be combined into technical modeling, technical and computer and software assisted modeling, and they can also feed into stakeholder and expert modeling, and that's that central box, interdisciplinary collaborative modeling. And from that process comes the knowledge and the intelligent government, which we hope will be fed into action and will feed back into, through a virtuous circle and a feedback loop, into the way that the issues facing the city are broken down and into the way that the data is gathered according to the priorities which are involved. And where CoData sees itself as contributing to that work, to that theoretical model, and the work that is underway and that we're involved in, is in understanding the questions that drive the data gathering, how the data is gathered, how it's described, what recognized specifications and standards are used to describe the data, and therefore how efficient we can make that process of data gathering and the feeding of the data into that interdisciplinary collaborative modeling. There'll be a lot more on that for the rest of this webinar, I'm sure. We're in the process of setting up the program, and we will launch the program, Making Data Work for Cross-Domain Grand Challenges, at the International Science Council's General Assembly in Oman in October next year. There's 2 slides here which may be of interest about upcoming CoData activities: a Fair Convergence Symposium in the first week of December. Information on the slides, please get involved. And we hope we will all be able to travel to Seoul in Korea in November 2021 for International Data Week. And this activity of healthy and resilient cities will be an important theme of that global conference. Thank you very much, friends.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Without losing any further time, our next speaker is Stephen Passmore from Resilience Brokers in London, UK.
Hello, everybody. I shall just set up my screen share, and I should start by thanking Franz for the invitation to join this this really important topic. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Fantastic, thank you. So yeah, I'm Stephen Passmore, and I work at a UK organisation called Resilience Brokers. Oops, sorry. Slight technical hitch. Sorry about that. Great. So I believe you can see the slides. And we are a great believer in demonstrations, in city region demonstrations potentially, but to show how to take theory and put it into practice and demonstrate real action to achieve much more healthy, resilient, sustainable cities. And I was really touched by the words earlier on about how closely this is linked to Chinese urban development policy. And so my talk today, I've got a short talk. We'll be looking at some specific lessons learnt in our demonstration programs, moving through 4 different scales. So one of them would be looking at individual behaviour change, the second one at a specific sector, the third one at a global mechanism, and the fourth one a little bit more detail on integrated systems modelling in a city region. But I wanted to start off by sharing something that will not be a surprise or new to anybody on the call, but I think it's worth reflecting on the World Health Organization definition of health, and they call it a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And why I think that that's particularly important to focus on from a city perspective is that all of these can be seen as a hierarchy, and that they're all interconnected. And so when we're addressing health and resilience in cities, just operating or working with the health sector or with health data is not sufficient. Because, for example, social well-being, we know that there's significant links between individuals' loneliness and premature death. And that's not to speak about communicable diseases and COVID-19 and many other aspects. So there's a lot more about urban planning that's creating the environment for people to thrive, for people to build healthy relationships, have access to work, fulfilling work, education, and all of those different sectors have a huge bearing on individual and community health. And just to reiterate the point, a lot of, and I think it's already been said, that cities can be thought of as systems of systems. And so this diagram to the right on your screen around the sketch of a human brain illustrates a number of those systems, and many of those scan across to the data, knowledge, action system slide that Simon shared. For example, considerations of climate and urban heat island effects, infrastructure, and I shall talk a little bit about some water and sanitation infrastructure shortly, economy and jobs, housing that's safe, affordable, and accessible. All of these are individual sectors or systems, and as we know, many of them have existing groups of people that work in them that are very sector focused and are expert in those sectors, and particularly talking in a science capacity. We know this. We might talk about this as interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary science. Understanding the connections between these different sectors is vitally important. Sorry, that went too far. And so, as I said, I wanted to, in my time, just draw on a number of lessons learned from taking a systems approach and working in cities to achieve more healthy and resilient places. And so here's a list of the projects that I will draw from, which are global and a range of different scales, and all related to the Sustainable Development Goals, which we heard about earlier. And so the first story, if you like, is on an individual level. And we worked with 4 of the boroughs in London, my home city, in the United Kingdom, that surround the Olympic Park. We hosted the 2012 Olympics in London 4 years after Beijing did. And what we found is that local residents over the age of 50, many of them after the Olympics had finished, didn't realize that they could access the Olympic Park. And they felt it was for sports people, or it wasn't very easy to get to. And so we worked with them to develop a communication channel, which would be able to share information from smart city sensors on weather, patterns, for example, on what the temperature and the weather conditions might be like the next day, on travel information, but also on features of the park. So which areas of the park might be interesting for them to attend. And we packaged that information, that data, into a mode that was very accessible for them. And so this group of people, not all of them, as we perhaps on the call, on the webinar, are all used to using smart phones and tablets and laptops and so on, whereas not everybody has that sort of accessibility. And so we created a text message service, SMS, which would send that information to this group of people, and they would receive that information in a way that they chose. And we've found from this pilot project, we found some very interesting changes in behavior in that simple step to overcome digital isolation, if you like, in providing data that perhaps many people on the webinar would take for granted to groups of people that don't have access to that necessarily. We found that they visited the park much more often, and that they were able to socialize much more often and take advantage of the health benefits of visiting the park. So it's a small example, but I wanted to remind us when we're talking about data and knowledge and political systems and decision-making systems, that quite a large part of what we're doing here is about dissemination and communication with citizens. So the second story I wanted to touch on is some work we're doing with urban planners, where we're bringing together health information, information on natural systems and green infrastructure, information on community systems and jobs, and on planning and governance. And we're doing this in a way to support planning, both local city plan making, to make a plan over perhaps 5 or 10 or 15 years that sets out the development requirements for that area, to ensure that health and resilience are embedded in that process, and also for enforcing planning decisions. So when a new development comes along and somebody invests in some land and wants to build something, what they build there fits within the plans that have been developed. And I wanted to share basically the learning from this. One of the so what I'm showing you here is an urban health index, which has been developed with a series of stressors, environmental stressors, and biological inequality. And it's been presented in a very granular format. So these are areas of population of perhaps about 15,000 people. And in doing this, we're able to identify down to neighborhood level the sorts of health stressors that might be present. And then that can inform planning policy. And here it is in perhaps a more familiar map, the map of, this is Greater London. And so you can see a big contrast between the red areas and the green areas, which can then inform policy. One of the key things that has come out of this initial work is that it's this kind of approach to package up information and data that's already been talked about in a way that's accessible to policymakers. So people that are setting those policies, often there is a political agenda, and quite often we're found in presenting systems level solutions, they're not necessarily effective unless they fit with both the political agenda of the policymakers, but also in a way that they can then communicate across their wide teams, and for example to the transport team or to the urban health team, information in a very easily digestible format. And I'll summarize that again in a minute. The third story I wanted to touch on is a piece of work we're doing with the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And we developed a 110-page open data infrastructure for city resilience document. It's a roadmap, it's a showcase, and it's a guide. So there is multiple case studies in there. There is a range of links about how cities and city officials particularly might collect and use fair data in a way that can support their approach to the 10 essentials to disaster risk reduction. And what we're finding with it, and so this is part of the UNDRR Making Cities Resilient campaign, which is being refreshed and launched in a day or two, I think, which will run up to 2030. And there are over 1,000 cities and towns that are members of this campaign. And we think that this is quite a good platform for us to explore the data knowledge action system in more detail. The work here is to digitize this document, to take it from a PDF into something that's much more engaging and much more digestible, taking the earlier points. And one of our sort of reviews from the refresh of this document, this capacity building document, is that given COVID-19 and given the recent focus on strategies for resilient cities and so on, is that many cities want to quickly move beyond the strategy and the theory, and they want to move to action. And so what the conclusion really is, and what the focus of this piece of work will be on, is the very practical, perhaps project-based measures that cities at very different levels of maturity might be able to implement to be able to achieve this. And then I'm not sure how I'm doing for time, Franz. I can't see any notes or anything.
You have already 12 minutes. If you could wrap up soon, it would be good.
All right, thank you. All right. Well, the final point that I want to make. So we worked in Ghana in the capital city of Accra to build an integrated systems model, bringing data from both the physical sciences to describe the water and sanitation system, and the social sciences to describe human activity, economics, jobs, and access to infrastructure and their health. And at the time of this project, which was around 5 years ago, 85% of human waste went into the environment, and that caused flooding and cholera outbreaks. And so Accra officials selected water and sanitation as the biggest resilience challenge that they faced. And I'll talk briefly about the systems modeling, but the main point that I wanted to make here was the importance that we found of developing what we call a collaborative laboratory or a co-laboratory. And the point about governance has already been made on the call. This is an area that has 15 different mayors across 15 different districts, all of them not necessarily working collaboratively, but sometimes competing for resources and for political power. And so what we were working on with the integrated systems modeling is to collect 200 data sets to describe the water and sanitation system, and then to build this collaborative laboratory. And this is a group of people who meet regularly to both help collect data and to do sensitivity analysis of the understanding and the policies that are coming through. And this group is made up of people from the public sector of local and national government, from the private sector, businesses that will be affected, from communities, for community groups that will be affected, and also from academia. And it's that spread or range of people that we, on a local level, that we believe is vitally important to help to translate, if you like, the data that's being collected and change it into actionable policy that can really make a difference. I will skip over these slides here quickly and just draw to the conclusion of this project, which was we were able to influence the investment in the water system, both for water supply and wastewater treatment, which fed into their 10-year investment plan and helped them to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 6. And just really briefly, this is my final slide. As I said, my talk is about lessons learnt. This hexagon shows a range of different dimensions or segments that we feel are the ingredients that are needed to help to move from strategy, data collection through to policy to action. And moving from the inside of the hexagon to the outside of the hexagon will demonstrate how an area or a city moves up in maturity. And so to recap across those 4 stories that I've shared with you, dissemination and engagement channels that are inclusive are really important to support effective behavior change towards healthy and resilient cities. The data knowledge action system needs to move into a policy lens. So it supports particular political agendas and makes it easier for those officials to make decisions with the data available. Cities want to move beyond strategies to action, and a project or a demonstrator approach will be a great way of demonstrating quickly how these ideas can be scaled and are effective. And finally, a collaborative laboratory or a co-laboratory is really important to support the collective intelligence and their use of and building trust in the data systems that are being used. So sorry for going a couple of minutes over time, and thank you very much for including me in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I would like to, before I invite the next speaker, who's Professor Ibtihal from Beirut University, I would like to announce to all the speakers that at the end we will have a final round in which I will ask you to give a 1-sentence recommendation, and you can already think about it now. And it is for this panel, it is going to be, I would like to make it very simple, so that, and ask you only to complete this 1 sentence, which is, in order to create urban intelligence, and then you complete that sentence. We are going to write up some of the key messages of this panel and attempt to publish a policy brief. For that, we will be in contact with you, but for our panel, I would like to end with a final round of recommendations. So our next speaker is Professor Ibtihal. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, Franz. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much to be part of this panel. And I must admit, I'm very happy that I heard Simon and Stephen, their presentation, because it would make things easier for me. It's a good introduction to what I'm going to tell you about our experience here back in Lebanon. So just a second, I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, actually, I'm gonna talk about the BAU Urban Lab, which is a new collaborative knowledge generation approach for urban innovation, which is so close to what has been said previously. If we look at Lebanon, Lebanon is a developing country which is facing complex environmental and socioeconomic changes. In addition, they are suffering incremental urban growth. Moreover, they are burdened with challenges of climatic and demographic changes, and health problems, which require collaboration across sectors and innovative transformations of urban governance. Not, of course, to forget what Lebanon is going through right now from multiple crises, be it related to the economic situation and the banking situation, or the urbanization, which reaches 88% of the country, the existence of refugees, pollution, pandemic, all of it creates quite an enormous urban stress on the population. This is from one side. And on the other side, we know that to go forward in planning, we need to handle big data, or which is really very complex, and many layers get together in order to take a decision. And we found BAU, which is the Beirut Arab University, who is in real close collaboration with the community, that we should really do something about it. Not to mention our close interactions with the municipalities and their problems. So at a certain time, to handle this, we thought about creating our urban lab. But before doing it, we had quite a challenging time to build up capacity to understand interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, and multidisciplinarity across the university and the colleagues. So actually, if I talk about why BAU Urban Lab, it was to respond to the increasing complexities and tension of urban issues and environments. It was to provide collaborative intelligence to avoid the deterioration of living and environmental conditions of urban residents, to strengthen the role and linkage of BAU in society, and actively engage the university with the community through creating mechanisms for co-production of knowledge to develop innovative solutions for urban challenges. And if we know a bit about the Urban Lab, then it was ideal to benefit the unique three-tiered approach of it in initiating cross-faculty interdisciplinary collaboration for addressing and solving specific criteria urban issues, and thereby contributing to the implementation of international agreements through Urban Agenda and United Nations SDGs. And actually, to overcome the complexity and in order to provide and improve health and well-being in the system, in the city, systems approaches is essential to create a dynamic interaction between different stakeholders and interaction disciplines. We know that it operates as a research hub that provides supporting data tools, publications, as well as networks with other urban labs at the regional or global levels, as well as facilitating collaboration with research, policy, municipalities, and thereby will foster innovative urban thinking. Actually, the way it's I'm sorry, just I want the previous, actually, we do have sometimes to work up to date with what's happening in the community or in the society. For example, after the big explosion of the port, we had to identify critical issues that has to do with the redevelopment and regeneration and the culture of the lost entities, and to create some solution for that and to implement actions. For example, we got very much interested in the youth and how they can remember some of the values of their culture and of their history. So the Urban Lab performs four main functions actually. It functions as a platform to carry out urban projects that improve the built environmental and social environments in urban areas. It addresses issues related to the complex urban systems. It builds capacity that refer to strengthening skills and know-how of staff, researchers, and officials working in urban development, and as a research hub that provides supporting data, tools, publications, as well as a network with other urban labs on the regional and global network. I mean, after the blasts, we had to work quickly and look at the needs of the society. One of it was a rapid assessment of the destruction that happened by the blast. We had to conduct a household survey. I mean, who knows Lebanon knows that basic data aren't available, like household surveys from primary sources. It's very difficult to get hold of because they don't really exist. So with our students and with the use of GeoPal, we had to help with the UN Habitat to quickly provide assessments for the destructed buildings. But apart from that, before the blast, we were working on a community-based project that has to do with the regeneration of one of the major roads in Beirut, which is called Tariq al-Jdida. And actually, this Tariq al-Jdida, it's overcrowded. It's overcrowded not just with the population and the density of mixed uses and traffic. And really, we went in depth with this study, and we provided the stage of conducting the documents for contracting with the municipality. And something maybe I should mention, that working in the municipalities are the body who really is implementing the project. So it's very important to work with the municipalities and make sure that we are fulfilling their requirements. Another big project we worked on with the UNESCO, and it was heading towards getting to know the good practices in different municipalities. We were to communicate with 150 willing to share their experience, and actually it was a very successful story, and got a lot of publicity later on, be it from the minister and from the stakeholders we worked with, which were UNESCO and UN Habitat. Other projects like City, Our Way, that was again another project, successful one, which was in Tripoli, and it was meant that the youth themselves say or put their say in developing parts of the city, and we managed to work with them hand by hand and developed really a part of the city their way, and that's why really it was named Our City, Our Way. It was the way that youth thought about the activities that are going on in generating one of the old districts in Tripoli. Other things we did, of course, collaborated with the international conferences that has to do with the city and well-being, like the 16th International Conference. This is one part of another project with the municipality of Beirut, and this is a very busy square that was really very depressing to drive around or to walk across, and we managed again to deliver the tender drawing, and that was shortly before the blast. And only the other day the mayor contacted me, and he's willing to go ahead with this project. Of course, projects like that, you do all the basic studies and you look into all the different elements that Stevens mentioned, some of them in his presentation, all the different sectors that really have a hand in these areas. And you need to communicate with them and to see their problems and really to put it on the platform, which is based by GIS software to develop the image that should be really taking further for implementation. Like, for example, the Tariq al-Jadid, the activities has to be looked at the connectivity, the identity, and of course to provide an balanced street after all. And all the exams that should be done, like for example, the complexity of noise had to be looked at thoroughly and scientifically, so that quick review of the workshops that has been offered to our colleagues at the university, just to make them understand the importance of urban health and well-being and how it is related to advancing systems, sciences and technology, and that so many disciplines should interact in order to really achieve a healthy resiliency. So, and by the end of these two big workshops and providing them with the initiatives of system approaches and why it is important to work systematically in status like that, it ended up with the Urban Health and Wellbeing International Conference, Building Collaborative Intelligence for a Better Lives in Cities. And we managed to launch our first journal that really adds to the value of what we are doing. The journal, it's Health and Well-Being. We even provided a special issue of it, which had all the researchers that has been submitted, and they were over the 77 maybe or 79 piece of researchers, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary ones. And they were peer-reviewed and really according to international standards. These journals, by the way, are hosted now on the platform of Elsevier by B-Press. Another something we managed to fulfill again in order really to boost the community is to work with the IAU, which we are member of, and we are one of the 16 universities in their cluster. We are leading SDG number 9, which stands for the industry and the innovation and infrastructure. And you have two slides of one of the group which who managed already to work out through several competitions, and with the help of the Urban Lab, we got them a patent for their work because they are producing a brick out of recycled materials. These are the new journals that we produced in order to put the research work that is evolved from our colleagues in. Actually new is the Urban Health and Well-Being journal, the Society, Culture and Human Behavior, Creative Sustainability, and Science and Technology. These are the 4 new ones, but apart from that, there is the APJ, which is the Architecture Planning Journal, that has been created long time ago, and the Journal for Legal Studies. Other things that we are working now on the moment is the urban corridors and how to really function right in the city. You know, Beirut is known by its commercial corridors, and we are working on the urban retrofitting as an approach to brace functional and social ruptures and the walkability and urban morphology. And thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibtihal. It's really inspiring to see how tireless you're working on the many urban health issues, which Beirut is never short of, I guess. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Franz.
Our next speaker is Mamelo from the United Nations University Institute of Computing and Society in Macau. Please, Mamelo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Can you confirm that you can hear me well?
Yes, I can see your slides.
Perfect, thank you. So just once again, thank you for the invitation, Franz, to be part of this panel. A really important topic, which is right in the middle of the pandemic, even more important to be thinking about how do we harness urban intelligence, not just for sustainable development, but to deal with some of these pressing global challenges. So I'd like to take a moment to just talk about what I see as two key challenges that we need to be thinking about, particularly around inclusive urban intelligence and also around issues of data justice and how this keep surfacing as issues that need to be addressed in the data systems that we develop going forward. So to get started, I will actually start with one of my favorite lines from a play by T.S. Eliot. This was, I think, performed in London in 1934, and essentially asks these key questions. Where is the life we've lost in living? Where is the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we've lost in information? And for me specifically, this once again highlights the importance of always linking back to how both information and data that we collect needs to contribute to knowledge and therefore wisdom and decision making, and ultimately to good life. And this is a simple value chain, which actually, from information systems or from any data value chains, we can see the continuum from data to insights, knowledge, to action, and to life. And I think this is a similar value chain that has been referred to in this panel earlier as well. But some of the key things that I would like to just draw attention to is that we typically spend a lot of time talking about qualitative data, about indicators data in different contexts, but in actual fact, we need to be also thinking broadly around other different types of data. So small data, thick data, which is more sort of like ethnographic data, qualitative data, thinking about perception data, which all of those contribute to information and actionable insights that we generate to then inform decision making. Some of my interests are around, for example, how do we keep the humans in the loop within these urban intelligence infrastructures, recognizing the fact that humans still possess a lot of tacit knowledge, which is never codified, which is never externalized. Similarly, how do we leverage indigenous knowledge that is sitting with a lot of populations, a lot of communities? And as well recognized by this panel, of course, all of this contributes to the collective intelligence that allows us as people to make better decisions, that allow us to harness the wisdom and the resources that are available within the urban settlements. And I think one key thing here that's interesting for me is around this collective information capabilities, which essentially recognizes a set of capabilities, information capabilities that arise out of the collective that can never be achieved when individual stakeholders are making decisions on their own. And ultimately, of course, all of this is to contribute towards this health and well-being and resilience goals, including sustainable life, and ultimately harmony within our urban settlements, within our cities. We recognize that that's very complex. We recognize that it's multidimensional and implicitly multi-aspectual. And I think an attempt to simplify that does not do justice to the underlying of the situation that we're dealing with. So where we are today, where we are generating so much data, where we're generating 500 million tweets every day, and we're generating 400 terabytes of data from every connected car, 292 billion emails sent every day. How do we harness that data to ultimately contribute to knowledge, to collective wisdom, and ultimately to life? I think it's important to, within the context of that value chain, understand who is being left behind in these data systems. And for me, this remains one of the key questions that both when you think about SDG indicators data, or we think about data within urban human settlements, we need to be thinking about who are we leaving behind and who is being marginalized in these data systems. The main reason why that's important to think about, one, is because we recognize the inefficiencies and the lack of effectiveness of not including more people, of not including more data sources and more insights. So I think one of the primary motivations is that the more people are engaged, the more stakeholders are engaged, the better the collective intelligence that emanates out of that. But also, I think the motivation for participation and inclusivity is actually grounded in the Declaration of the Human Rights. So, for example, the right to life and development, the right to science, and therefore citizen science. These are, the rights which we need to be thinking about what limitations are excluding people from participating in those and enjoying those rights. And also several conventions that talk about, access to information and access to decision making, etc. So I think within intelligent cities, we need to be thinking about inclusion and inclusivity as contributing to some of these goals. And it's not just about inclusion because it's efficient. I think what COVID-19 has demonstrated very well to us is that exclusion in some of these data systems is actually a life and death decision. I mean, for a lot of people, having been excluded in the COVID-19 data systems, that has resulted in loss of life, in loss of health, etc. And I thought I'll just put this up here just to ground ourselves again. I hadn't checked these stats in a long time, but it's actually incredible and sobering to see the number of deaths that we experienced around the world. And something like COVID-19, once again, just thrust us into how complex and how intertwined and how connected some of the risks that we are facing going forward. Worth mentioning as well is the fact that COVID-19 is just one of these many global risks and challenges. This is from a report that was done by the World Economic Forum on the Global Risk Report 2020. And beyond just the many global risks that are facing individuals and facing cities of the future, what's more important for me is the interdependencies between these risks. And once again, COVID-19 has been a perfect example of that, of how a health crisis has morphed into an economic crisis, into an education crisis, into a political crisis in some countries. And once again, all the more why we need systems thinking, why we need complex systems analysis in order to think about solving some of these problems. So what I'd like to share very briefly is some of the work that we have done within our lab. We've done a lot of work looking at SDG indicators to try and understand what are some of the ways that people get marginalized and excluded in indicators data. And we've used the same framework to look at, for example, citizen science. In what ways can citizens get engaged and participate in that? So we just going to share this very quickly because I think it can also inform how we think about marginalization and inclusion in urban intelligent cities. So we identify a group of 5 voices who are marginalized at different stages of the data value chain. Maybe if I can just jump to the end. This is actually the value chain which we use to think about steps of marginalization along the way. So you'll see that from the data identification stage, we identify this group called unknown voices. I'll go back to that just now. Within the collection of the data itself, there's 3 distinct ways that individuals and people get marginalized. And all the way into the analysis of the data, there are ways that people get marginalized. So you'll see immediately that so far we've really looked at the supply side of data. We still have to do a lot of work to look at the consumption side of data in terms of data use and how individuals get marginalized in there as well. So just going back to this, the first group is this unknown voices. And these typically are individuals or population groups who are invisible in mainstream societies. So, for example, if you think about isolated communities, modern-day slaves, concealed individuals, these are population groups that even within big cities would typically remain invisible. You can think about the homeless people here as well. They remain invisible to data systems and to data collecting agencies. There's also the silent voices. Now, the key feature here of the silent voices is that these are people who are limited due to the restricted agency from vocalizing, from having data collected about them. So UNICEF, for example, highlighted about how over 500 million children are effectively uncounted within the SDGs. You can think about developmentally disabled people who might need assistive technologies in order for them to be counted and to participate in the data systems. We identify another type of marginalization, and this is marginalization that's due to societal marginalization and exclusion. So, for example, you can think about how in different countries, gender non-conforming people, maybe groups at the bottom of the social ladder, stigmatized population groups. These are groups that in society are marginalized and therefore by extension also marginalized in the data systems. We also have these unheard voices, which is particularly around the sampling and the data collection. So some of the talks earlier have talked about, for example, the use of digital technologies to collect data that we use to inform urban intelligence. So recognizing that within urban settlements, there's also, for example, people who are not digitally connected, and therefore people who would get excluded from such data collection instruments. And lastly, very quickly, the ignored voices. Now, we identify these groups with regards to the analysis that's undertaken on data. There's been a lot of work in recent months looking at just what are some of the biases, what are some of the discrimination that gets included in some of the algorithms, in the machine learning algorithms and AI algorithms. And so in the analysis process, we also need to be careful about how are individuals getting excluded and marginalized in that process. I've shown you this already. So I think that's the one piece of the picture. We need to be thinking about, first of all, what are some of these data-centric aspects of marginalization, and therefore how do we mitigate that? But the second point that I wanted to talk about is really just around data justice issues. Right? So beyond the technical data-centric considerations, what else do we need to be thinking about in urban intelligent infrastructure? And the backdrop of that for me is actually the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen that some of the challenges with COVID-19 data systems has not really been about the data, but has been about everything else about the data. So you'll see here, for example, how people had lots of concerns around privacy issues, around security of the data, around perpetuating marginalization and inequalities. And for me, these kind of issues hamper the effectiveness of urban intelligence data systems. So broadly, I've categorized this under data justice concerns, and I'll present just a couple of frameworks that helps us think about what are some of these issues as far as data justice is concerned. So Lynette Taylor talks about data justice as the fairness in the way that people are made visible, represented, and treated as a result of production of digital data. And she breaks it down into these three key concerns. One around visibility and invisibility, one around engagement with technology, and anti-discrimination. So I won't go into too much detail about each of those, but just to highlight that when you think about particularly personal data and human-centric data that we collect, we need to be thinking about how are we addressing some of these concerns in the data systems that we are developing. Richard Hicks and Henken from UK have also advanced a notion of data justice, which is the primary ethical standard by which data resources and processes are evaluated. And they define 5 different aspects of data justice. So from procedural data justice around information flow within the information value chain, instrumental data justice, which has to do a lot with data justice with regards to the use of data, so more on the consumption side of data, as well as rights-based data justice, structural data justice, and distributive data justice. So the last framework that I would like to briefly present, which I think is actually important, and we've used it quite a lot in our work, is the work by Motia et al., who define this human data interaction framework, particularly highlighting the human at the center of the flows and data, and providing mechanisms for citizens to interact with the systems explicitly. So within that, the key things that they highlight is around legibility. So for individuals and citizens to understand what data is collected about them, when the data is collected, how it's collected, why that data is collected, and by whom it's collected. And then agency has to do with enabling citizens and individuals to interact with their data. So this includes, permissions, consent, withdrawal, revocations, etc. And lastly, negotiability, which has to do with as the data gets used, as contexts change, what control do individuals have? How do you maintain context integrity with individuals' data going forward? So just to conclude, I think for me, the urban intelligence holds a lot of promise and a lot of potential. I think it allows us to be able to harness the intelligence between individuals and computing and different sources of data. But ultimately, I think some of the key challenges are around embedding data justice principles in the technology designs, around considering data justice throughout the various data assemblages that make up urban city intelligence, also putting in place explicit measures to mitigate exclusion and marginalization. And lastly, of course, establishing these collective intelligence infrastructures explicitly. So in a nutshell, thank you very much. Those are just some quick thoughts, and happy to discuss a bit more in detail. So thank you very much, Franz.
Thank you, Mamelo. I would like to ask all panelists in the end to give this one sentence of recommendation. Our time is running out a little bit for a larger discussion. But now is time for our panelist, Wang Lan from Tongji University here in China.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Fran. This is my title for the presentation today. I would like to show you the studies on healthy city planning based on multiple data sets. When we talk about healthy city, I would always cite the definition from WHO as it's listed here. But we also need to understand, based on the definition, we need to find a way to really plan it and develop it. The chart on the right side show how these different layers of space and environment will influence the health of human being, and it will give us the clue to develop the theoretical models and empirical studies based on data to figure out what we should do to protect human being. So based on that, I developed this sort of how we could think about to promote the healthiness of urban space. The first approach is how we deal with the high incidence of non-communicable diseases, such as diabetes, cancer, and we should think about urban space as a very good container to promote people's physical activity and social interaction. And the other approach, which is highlighted this year, is how we could think about the space prevention and intervention to protect the pandemic, different kinds of new emerged infectious diseases. And to do that, we need to think about how we could use the data to understand the pandemic and to understand how we should isolate the source of infection, cut off the transmission, and more importantly, we need to find out the vulnerable populations and provide the support to them. So based on the two approaches, the Healthy City Lab I'm leading to develop a more specific theoretical framework and also conducted empirical studies based on this theoretical framework. So this one is specifically for the NCDs. So we have the different kinds of factors in built environment, which we could handle, we could adjust. And then we have different pathways to promote the physical and mental health. The first pathway, for instance, is decreased pollution sources and its human exposure. The second pathway is how we could increase the physical activity and social interaction. And the third approach is we should provide accessible health facilities. This theoretical framework has been adopted by WHO and UN Habitat in the new announced sourcebook for integrating health in urban and territory planning. This is just a theoretical framework. How we could use the data, different data sets to support the empirical study and find out what we really should do. So for the first pathway, we conducted a GIS-based spatial analysis. The data set we used in this study is basically the incidence of specific disease at the community level. And we identify the land use, road system, development density, all those what we call the independent variables, and develop a regression model to understand what kind of factors of the built environment significantly associated with the incidence of the non-cancer. So we should think about how we could integrate all those different data sets at the same geographic level. That's our challenge at the very beginning. And we find very interesting results and the policy implications. And then for the second one is how we could find out this is the second one, how we could promote the physical activity and social interaction. So for this one, we conducted what we call the observational study. So the data are connected all on site. Used our surveyor to talk with the people and also recording the people's activity in this particular space. And then we use that, the diversity of the physical activity as the independent variable, and then as a dependent variable, and then use the site and the vegetation characteristics to function as independent variables in the model. Then we find out what we should design for a park to promote physical activity, especially its diversity. So in this study, we use sort of observational data, and also the further study, we use the GPS instrument to identify the roads of the local residents where they want to go, and to find out their temporal and spatial behavior. And the third approach is what we're trying to find out how we could provide accessible health facilities, especially like what just the professor said on the health equity issue. So in this case, we identify the space that is significantly lack of sports and senior healthcare facilities. In Shanghai, we also use the Gini index and the Lawrence curve to find out the level of the inequity for those facilities provision. And this data is more based on the what we call the spatial-based data, like at a specific geographic scale, the population, and use the GIS to figure out their accessibility, and also combine with other types of the behavior data to find out this distribution of facilities. So all those three pathways are more focusing on the NCDs. And then we also started the study for the infectious disease. This is sort of also the theoretical framework we developed to identify what kind of urban development could influence the infectious process. It will include the ecological process and also social process. And in this way, we conducted the empirical study for that too. And I think today we really raised a very important topic to discuss, because data is always an issue in the research. And actually, this data is open data. We connect from the websites of local governments, health committees, and the media to identify the cluster transmission of the COVID-19 in China. But we cannot access to the more detailed data. But only based on this, we also can find out where were the very important venues we should pay attention, like a hospital, like where we are shopping. Those are the places we should really think of to provide policies and instruments to isolate and cut off the transmission. Because right now, this kind of disease, we need to focus on the three things: the sources, the transmission, and also we need to pay attention to the vulnerable population. And this is another empirical study. We also connect the data based on the open sources to find out the policies announced by the local governments in 4 different cities, and to see how those different types of city involved along the time, and also to figure out what's the effects of those policies in terms of control the infection. We identified 4 very interesting cases in China, and they have specific characteristics facing this pandemic. For instance, Shanghai, they paid a lot of attention to protect the population from the boarding, because international travel right now is the major threat for Shanghai. And for Hangzhou, the market sector involved a lot in the policy development. If you know what we call the health code, this is sort of another type of data we are hoping to be able to use in the research, but right now it's still not available. All those very good research, I think we need to connect or access to very good data, and to develop better policy, we also need to conduct a very good empirical study. So this is why I think data sets are so important in different kinds of research and policy development. And then at last part, I want to highlight that to develop urban intelligence for healthy city, we also need to think about how we could integrate health in urban planning based on different kinds of data. For instance, how we could integrate health consideration in the planning system. This is the structure of the planning system in China. Some of the structure are similar to that in the United States. For instance, the regulatory planning. We also have zoning in the US. So those kind of plans actually provide the platform for us to integrate health consideration with the support of data. And then this is at the micro level. So what we call the 15 minutes community life cycle actually provides a lot of support for both daily health and also the pandemic prevention. So those are the facilities and agencies, we should think about how we could integrate into this workable area. And the data also are very important because right now we are doing another study is trying to figure out the exactly working roads and working area for the local residents. Different groups of the local residents, they have different behavior, so they have different shape of this 5 minutes community life circle. We need to plan those facilities based on their temporal and spatial behavior. And then also we should have develop certain guidelines and standards to develop the healthy city and healthy district or healthy neighborhoods. All those different kinds of geographic scale can provide the platform or space for our healthy city thinking. But we also need to find out the what we call the evidence-based practice, how we could find out the better results of research to support this are very important. And for me, healthy city planning and design is how we could reduce health risks, meet health demands, and better allocate health elements and resources. Then we could achieve health equity. And for our Healthy City Lab, we also conducted certain design, use the data analysis. For instance, this is what we call a healthy-oriented micro-urban regeneration in Shanghai. And what we do is to connect the human behavior data and also have those sunlight and wind field simulation to identify the appropriate space for people to conduct physical activity, and then allocate the function zones. And also we respect the input of the local residents. For instance, this is the activity we hosted to let the students who are not very far from this park to provide their thoughts and their proposals. This is what we call the lateral planning. We connect the bottom-up data in this way. And then this is what we have, and it has been developed. So this is sort of how we integrate the data into the design, and the data are from different kinds of sources, and we use different technology to integrate that into the planning and design. So this is sort of the last chart. I think based on what we know about urban intelligence and also healthy city, we should integrate empirical study and the practice, and also some policies, instruments such as health impact assessment together to promote healthy city. And this might be the answer. Then I think I will stop here and to answer friends' question later. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Wang Lan. That was a really exciting presentation, and you made it very clear that with a better data, we can make cities which respond better to human demands and to human health, also by integrating health into urban planning. Thank you very much. Thank you also for already responding to the last question, the recommendation sentence I'm requesting from all our panelists. So in order to make, you were saying that in order to make, create urban intelligence, could you mention those 3 points again? It was institutions,
Okay, thank you. I think in order to create urban intelligence, we should develop appropriate institutional design to establish basis for data sharing and analysis, and to protect the privacy, and to understand better human being and nature.
Thank you very much. Mamelu, would you be so kind to share with us your recommendation sentence?
Yeah, thanks very much, Franz. It's a very simple sentence. So in order to co-create urban intelligence, we need to implement data systems infrastructures that not only operationalize fair data principles, but that are also grounded in core data justice principles.
Thank you very much. Ibtihal?
I will say it shortly, Franz, that really we need an urban lab, because in the urban lab, it encompasses all what we are talking about right now and all aspects of intelligence. So an urban lab is quite a good and a start and an end of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I was hoping you would say that.
Great.
Stephen?
Thank you, Franz, and thank you everyone for a really rich information and discussion. My sentence, in order to create urban intelligence, we need frictionless, trusted data and knowledge to help decision makers, citizens and stakeholders to act in their collective best interests.
Thank you very much. Simon?
Thanks, Franz, and thanks, everyone. I've gone for a shorter version, which needs unpacking, and when unpacked, it's very similar to what colleagues have said. But mine is, in order to create urban intelligence, we need co-designed data ecosystems.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I want to repeat again, we are going to, we took notes from this panel, and we want to approach you again and try to publish a policy brief from the discussion we had. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, friends and colleagues. I'm very happy to contribute to the policy brief.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It's a pleasure. It's very interesting. Some excellent presentations.
Thanks, Simon.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Franz.
Ooh.